everyone, and welcome to our webinar titled Winning the War Against Cyber Attackers, brought to you by Dark Reading, ThreatTrack, and United Business Media Limited. I'm Sara Peters, Senior Editor at Dark Reading, and I will be your moderator today. But before we get started, I just have a quick few announcements. First of all, we'd like to invite you to be part of today's discussion by submitting questions at any time during our presentation. Just type your question into the Q&A text area located to the right of the presentation window, and then click the Submit button. At this time, by the way, we recommend that you disable your pop-up blocker so you can utilize all the interactive features of your console. Second, the slides will advance automatically throughout the event, and you can download a copy of the slides by clicking on the Additional Resources button located below the presentation window. Finally, if you experience any technical problems today, just visit our help guide by clicking on the help link below the presentation window. You can also contact our technical support helpline by clicking that same link. Now, on to today's presentation, Winning the War Against Cyber Attackers. I am very glad to have here with me today David Monahan, Research Director of Security and Risk Management at EMA, and Usman Choudhary, Senior Vice President and Chief Product Officer at ThreatTrack. David Monahan is a Senior Information Security Executive with over 15 years of experience. He has organized and managed both physical and information security programs, including security and network operations, SOCs and NOCs, for organizations ranging from Fortune 100 companies to local government and small public and private companies. He has diverse audit and compliance and risk and privacy experience, providing strategic and tactical leadership, developing, architecting, and deploying assurance controls. Usman Choudhary is a Senior Vice President and Chief Product Officer for ThreatTrack, responsible for defining and executing the company's product development strategy and driving new cybersecurity innovations throughout its global research and development organization. He leads teams responsible for the creation of new advanced threat defense technologies and the Viper endpoint security solutions. Gentlemen, thank you for being with us today.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you.
So let's start out with the fact that the recent Verizon data breach investigations report found again that most major data breaches are not discovered for weeks, even months, and are often discovered not by the victim organization, but by a third party. And this is the case for a while now. So why is this the case? With all the tools that we have at our disposal, why does it still take so long to detect these sophisticated attacks? Usman, you want to start with that?
So thanks, Sarah. Simply put, there's too many point solutions, too many of the solutions that are out there to effectively protect the enterprise are still in silos. And it's increasingly difficult, especially with the basic solutions, the next generation, the advanced solutions coming out, all of these pieces not integrating well together. So integration is a big cost, and it causes a lot of complexity. Detection by itself is just not enough. The whole visibility of the entire landscape as far as threat, end-to-end visibility is really, really key, and that's what's really needed. Make it easier to integrate. Look at the holistic view, visibility across your entire network, not just perimeter. Those are some of the key aspects that we're lacking in today.
Absolutely. In fact, to your point, in the data-driven security report that we did at EMA, lack of integration was the primary concern issue that our respondents had with technology. The security technologies, they just have too many point solutions. They don't work together well. So that creates a huge issue from that perspective. The other aspect, I think, that makes it difficult from the detector's perspective, whether it's a technology or an analyst, is the identity issue around attackers want to exploit our individual identities. Mandiant actually came out and said every issue that they had investigated forensically had involved some sort of insider identity. So once someone can get a hold of that identity, either via a bad link or some other type of attack, they look just like you or me, Bob, Sue, Jane, whoever. And so being able to discern who the actual threat is and what's going on becomes very difficult from a technology perspective.
Absolutely. And that's the specific reason why both perimeter defenses, along with network activity and activity of both users and their identities, and having that information real time, contextual, and that situational awareness is really, really
Absolutely.
Paramount.
Absolutely.
Right. Now, attackers are also using a variety of methods now for hiding and obfuscating their exploits. Can you discuss a bit some of the methods that they're using these days to keep themselves out of our reach that way?
You know, I want to just put it in just really simple terms. The attackers are clever. They are using really clever and innovative ways, and that's what some of the techniques themselves are actually fairly simple, but they're using them in a very clever way in order to exploit some of those vulnerabilities. They're also, again, there's a lot of specifically solutions out there, but the focus has to be around innovation and subverting that cleverness and really getting to those attackers when that attack is in flight, not after the fact.
Absolutely. You know, interesting enough as well with that, when you look at the way attackers are primarily getting to the data, they're either exploiting vulnerabilities or they're exploiting identity. And I don't want to sound like a broken record here, but if you break it down very basically, you get to that aspect. But there's a lot of vulnerabilities out there, and as you say, they're innovative. They sit down and they'll dig through an operating system or a set of applications, and they will find those issues to be able to exploit them. So it becomes very difficult from that perspective.
And I think from a solution perspective, when you look at that type of, again, simple yet sophisticated kind of an approach, and this clever approach, from a solution perspective, we have to be more agile, we have to be more adaptive to that change and that nature. And you have to employ new techniques, machine learning and so on, right? As opposed to just rules-based approach. That just simply won't work.
Yeah, in that report we did as well, over 50% of the individuals that responded said that they look to the security vendors to help them because they realized that what they've had in the past, legacy technologies, have not been successful. I mean, they help, don't get me wrong, but they haven't been entirely successful. Looking at last year, especially as the year of the breach, we need to find something that will work better to be able to put those data points together.
And end-to-end.
End-to-end, absolutely.
Well, let's talk about the technologies out there, because there are a lot of new detection tools. They've really evolved. So what is out there right now, and what kinds of questions should the CISOs of the world be asking themselves when they're trying to decide which of these they should actually be using? I mean, David, do you want to start with that?
Sure. There are quite a few technologies that work together, but if you look at it from a large-scale perspective, we have things that focus on the endpoint. We have things that focus on the perimeter. We have things that will do network packet inspection at various levels. And then we have other types of prevention, detection, and response technologies that look at any aspect of log information that we have. So there are literally thousands of solutions out there to choose from, which makes it very difficult from a market perspective for those CISOs to figure out, which one do I need to use. Now, I agree that from a holistic perspective, you need to look at layered security. There is no one solution that does it all. However, the more you can get out of a single solution to be able to combine the aspects of network and endpoint and things like that, the better you're going to be, because then you don't have to worry about the silo issue that we've experienced in the past quite as much.
Yeah, so I mean, just to add on to that point, visibility beyond the perimeter is just really key, and that's very important. But the other really critical aspect that we need to now look at is usability. Usability and the complexity that's been introduced because of all these siloed solutions for the security analyst or someone who's in the incident response team. So usability, visibility, and usability is really key.
Absolutely.
And the usefulness of the solution itself, catering to the actual needs of the incident responders.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think from that same perspective, usability has been an issue we've fought with since the beginning of IT security.
Yeah.
Whether it's dealing with multiple interfaces that we have to stitch together manually, or multiple consoles, or whatever it is. So visibility is affected by usability as well. And I remember working on the front line myself and having a screen up for my operations information, and a screen up for my antivirus information, and a screen up for my SIM, or whatever else. And
you got to stitch it all together. You're
absolutely.
Like, wait a minute, I need to look. The more alerts you get, the more incidents you have, you're like, wow, this is a never-ending problem. I'm going to have to switch through 6, 7 consoles to even just get that simple answer to the question, did this happen before? Have I seen this before? Those are just simple questions that take a long time to even just research or analyze.
Yeah, and time is very valuable in those situations.
Absolutely.
Yeah, related to this, the way that the detection is done these days. Some tools are still using signatures to blacklist things. Now we've got some new tools that are using behavioral analysis. to see where these anomalies are. Can we use these tools together? Or should we just be picking one at a time? I mean, how do they all work and integrate?
Well, so let me pick this one up. When I look at this, we have definitely evolved. And, you'll hear the term of advanced threat or advanced solution or next generation. By the way, when everything gets advanced, then, everything is so that's the interesting piece, right? But, I look at it as we've got now advanced silos. That's really great. So we got advanced silos and the same old problem back again. And then, these solutions are costly to implement, especially multiple of them, both from a process perspective as well as solution perspective. My view is that you do need multiple of these styles, right? You need multiple styles to give you that coverage, give you that depth.
Absolutely.
But it has to be a better way. There has to be something that kind of brings it together and has a minimalist approach, a simplistic view, although hides a lot of the complexity, but is doing a lot of the intelligence for you.
Yeah.
And so that layered approach still has to be there, but it has to be around various styles and combining that. And then, there has to be a paradigm shift. The paradigm shift has to be that it's not only attackers, but it's also the folks who are in the incident response teams and the security analysts. Right. The paradigm shift has to be a new way of thinking and how we're going to utilize these solutions and how we look at that visibility across end to end. That paradigm shift is a difficult transition, but I think that's where we are.
That's key, yeah. And one of the other things you mentioned when you talked about silos, it's not just about technology silos, it's about political silos. I mean, unfortunately, we're all people, and we have issues within our businesses where the IT folks don't want to talk to the security folks or whomever, and so we get these fiefdoms that cause problems in being able to get enough data and get the right data. So it can be very, very difficult from that perspective. And I like something else you said, which was styles. I think there are a number of technology styles, and not just platforms, but styles in the way information is gathered, presented, visualized, etc., that are very key to being able to pull it all together and make it happen.
Absolutely.
Okay, so given this rapidly evolving nature of both the exploits and the tools, what on the process side can we do to shorten that time of detection? I mean, if you were a CISO in an enterprise today, what would be, say, the priorities? What would you want to start with first?
I'm going to work this a little bit backwards from the way your question was asked, but I think the most important thing is to make sure you have your process documented. You asked about the process. So there are a lot of organizations that either, one, don't have it written down, or two, they have it written down, but it's shelfed, right? It sits there and no one knows what it is or how it works. They don't practice it, they don't test it. And it's going to come to a time when something happens, and the worst time to test it is when you actually have to put it on the floor and use it, because usually names are out of date, phones and stuff like that. So that's important as well. Additionally, though, from a technology perspective, you have to have technologies that will integrate with your workflow, but they'll also be able to direct you. I think no one really wants automatic response. They don't want the issue where the technology acts like Skynet and is self-aware and goes off and does its own thing, right? We don't want that because we're afraid it's going to break things like we've seen in the past. But they do want the ability to assist individuals who are your analysts on the front line. So you can take someone who's a relatively low-skilled person, a newbie, if you will, right, and be able to help them, be a force multiplier to help them get to the right decision and get to the right point. So it gives them information and it directs them, hey, I need to push this button or pull this rod or turn this knob, whatever it is, right? So I think that's another aspect of force multiplication and helping us, because we know we have shortages in staff and other things that we've got to be able to overcome.
The way I would just describe that is that the solutions have to be empowering.
Absolutely.
It has to be empowering those folks on the front line. They can't be impediments to them, and they can't be more noise or more complexity. So empowerment of the frontline security team is what we really need, and the tools have to assist in that versus all the promises.
Yep. A lot of promises out there.
From a lot of people who can't deliver on any of them, right?
Yep.
Okay, let's talk about now that lag between detection and remediation. You've managed to find the fact that an attack happened. Now you want to prevent it from going from just a little intrusion to a major embarrassing data breach. What kind of steps can you take to contain the damage? What kind of things can you do to just minimize the potential impact?
So I think that I talked about a paradigm shift. One of the big things that we have to start doing, and there's some awareness, but although more needs to be done around this, that we have to stop looking at alerts. We have to look at campaigns, because now really campaigns are what targeted attacks are. There's a lot of subversion. There's a lot of techniques that they use. But again, I talked about it being very simple. Now, the way you detect campaigns is that you actually stitch the dots, and you actually start to make visibility, create that context and visibility. Now, that word visibility and context has been around for a while. People have talked about that, and the solution of the past around visibility was, let's throw more data at the person, all the time, and that simply is not working. So when I say visibility, what I really mean by that is that it's visibility when you need it most. The exact or precise or concise amount of data at your fingertips when you are under attack, and being able to see the forest for the trees and see the campaign, not just the alert.
Absolutely.
And putting the right data at your fingertips. See, visibility means end-to-end. Visibility also means you able to simply follow the chain in a natural way. Usability comes into that. And having that data at your fingertips, but it's not more data. It's less data, but the right amount of information, and the right information with the right priority at your fingertips at that time.
I think one of the other aspects of that is removing those false positives. If we look at technology in the past, our traditional SIM was created to be a repository and pull all the information together. The problem is now we have organizations that have 10 people that have literally thousands of alerts that will come through, and they're rules-based and they're correlation engines and things like that, but they don't have the analysis capability. They rely strictly on the people. So I have 5,000 lines of information, and now I have to stitch them together and figure out what the actual problem is. So being able to condense that into some sort of either risk or correlative formula, there's plenty of algorithms out there to do it, is really imperative to getting these people to the point where they can actually react quickly, so they know these are the 10 issues that are really bad, and I'm going to deal with them first, not these are the 1,000.
Yeah, and then also I think you may have 1,000, but if you start to realize that this is part of a campaign, and these 1,000 really are part of a bigger picture, a bigger story, be it global or specific to your enterprise, that information, that knowledge, and that intelligence, how quickly we can bring that to bear for a security analyst to make that decision at that point when it's happening. Right. You can see it coming. Yeah. That's really key, as opposed to looking at mountains of data after the fact, months later, to say, oh wow, look at this stuff happened, and well, it's kind of too late.
A corollary I'd make to that, which I think is really interesting, is when you look at the old network management tools. Right, you get alerts that said, I now have 5,000 devices that are down. Well, we can't deal with that, right? Can you get me up to another layer above that and say, oh, it's really this one router or this one switch or this one device, and that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to help them.
How do you prioritize? How do you prioritize from a sea of information to prioritize the right information?
Exactly.
Great.
You don't want all this data just from an academic point of view to find out what happened a year ago. You want the data, just the data you need when you need it, as opposed to huge amounts that you don't have time to look through. Right. Which brings me to the next question, really, which is, there's a shortage of people in the security field. You really don't have enough time to do much of anything, including detecting and remediating all of these security events that keep happening, which means that we need more automation.
Absolutely.
What is going on in the field of automation? What can we do to improve it? David, you want to start with that one?
Wow. So I absolutely agree. We can see that there's thousands, if not millions, of requisitions out there for security folks all over the world that we can't fill. 68% of organizations say they have some sort of staff impact around security. They're not able to get to it. So automation is a key. And as we mentioned earlier, it's not about doing things automatic. It's about automated. So we want to be able to use a technology that will condense the information, as we just talked about. We also want to have the ability for that individual, at whatever skill level they're at, to be able to operate effectively, and so that comes back to, again, having a better visibility across the environment of what's going on, and then hopefully the technology will actually help them to get through that particular situation to some degree. It'll either direct them to a key source or a key issue, whether it's an IP address, a URL, domain, individual, whatever it is, or if it will actually give them the information to say, this is the application that seems to be causing a problem, you want to investigate this application, it may have been compromised, whatever. So from that perspective, automation is absolutely a key in being able to get those individuals to be able to, again, force multiplier, work at a very much more competent level than they can normally just by themselves, because they don't have the experience potentially.
Just adding onto that, as far as challenge for the from a staff perspective, from a skill perspective. If you look at the root cause and you take a step back, it's the amount of change. The adoption curve for the amount of change, any sort of segment of organizations in the enterprises, but there's so much change in the threat landscape. I talked about advances now. Everyone's advanced, right? So now there's so much change in the solutions. There's so much change in the threat landscape itself, and that's a really difficult learning curve. And so it's not just a matter of skill, but how do you keep pace? How do you keep up to speed on all of the open source vulnerabilities? How do you keep pace with all of the new threats and the new ways of exploiting and extorting data, right? So this is really what I think is at the root of I mean, there's a skill shortage, don't get me wrong, that's an issue, and there's a resource issue, but I think that change is constant change. It's just that turnover on new types of exploits, new types of techniques, and
so
new
even
solutions.
People that are experienced have trouble keeping up.
I mean, so that's
a huge volume.
The volume issue is just really there. So that's a big problem.
Well, I mean, I completely agree with you on that. I think, though, that do you feel that part of the problem is that we're being a little bit too specific about what we're looking for from security professionals? I mean, some of the job descriptions that I'm seeing out there, it's like we want everything and the kitchen sink from people, and we're really looking for super technical people, even as the kinds of jobs are becoming maybe a little bit less technical. It's a little bit off of the topic of threat detection.
No, it's a great question. It's a great topic.
So from that perspective, I agree with you. We tend to write these laundry lists of requirements that you have to know everything from A to Z, and there are a few people out there that are able to do that. So that creates another pressure point and friction point in the marketplace, where you do have a very select few people that know that level of information, and they're going to go to the highest bidder, right? So we're almost beginning to repeat our .com boom issue that we had with talent's going to go to the highest bidder, so everybody else is left wanting. I think we do need to be concise about what we're able to do, but also the tools, if they can help us to bring the information together, will be a significant improvement there. Because even if I know A through L, and you know M through Z, then hopefully we can work together, but the tool will help us to put that information together somehow as we both work on different aspects of that problem, going back to what Usman said about the entire visibility and looking at not the symptoms but the root cause.
Right.
Yeah, just to add on to that was, to answer your question was also the comment I heard earlier was that there's a lot of turnover, a lot of change also in the organization. So because of that high demand, because of that risk, there's also a lot of change in organizations, in security organizations. So people are moving, across different organizations very rapidly. That's creating a vacuum. That's creating a gap. And so then you scramble to fill those gaps, and I know you've been in that position, operating a large team in your past, and those holes are there while those people are not, at that point in those positions. So that's a big issue. Turnover is a big issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other aspect of that, just quickly, is when you have that level of turnover, you lose the tribal knowledge, right? When it's an employer market, you generally have people stay in place, and everybody has everything stuffed in their head, and somebody knows everything about everything because they've been there forever. And then when you get into the times like this, where it's an employee market, if you will, you lose that tribal knowledge, which is what a lot of companies rely on, because they either don't have the documentation, they don't have the proper tooling, or whatever the case is.
Yeah, definitely. Kind of that similar thing that you have with in-house development, where you have that one guy who knew everything about that one thing, and then he leaves, and then you're left with nothing. Okay, so another problem we have is that we're still having a hard time quantifying the costs of this this really long period between detecting an attack and then remediating an attack. And because we're having a hard time quantifying that cost, it's hard to convince the money people to invest in all of these tools that we need. So what are some of the methods that we can use to measure these costs so that we can make a better business case? You want to start with that, David?
I think the first thing is if we look externally, we have numerous examples from last year especially of organizations that were compromised and what they've spent. If we look at, unfortunately, Target and Home Depot that were huge impacts to their financials with hundreds of millions, nearly hundreds, over $100 million apiece. But if we look at that, we can actually create a model around that to understand, that it took this long to discover and it took this many dollars, and so ultimately, this is the cost that we're dealing with. So that's a very simplistic way of looking at it, but it is actual dollars. It's not a theoretical model. Beyond that, you can also dig down into your own organization and look at how many people it takes for you to operate on a daily basis. Divide that by their hourly wage and figure out, okay, per day, per hour, here's what I'm spending. If an average attack takes a week to remediate, right, then here's the amount of dollars that we're going to spend to actually take care of that. Plus, we lose the opportunity cost of what they would do normally to support the business. So there are business models out there that you can use to be able to identify that, and then use that to apply towards, here's how much I want to invest in security as an insurance policy, if you will, because that's often the way it's done. There's also value based on total cost of ownership. If you look at talk to other people that have owned a particular solution in the past, you should be able to say, how much do you use it, what do you get out of it, and then ultimately they can say that it takes this many dollars to buy it, this much in the support contract, this many people to be able to support it, and so ultimately you can figure out a total cost of ownership and then figure out, reverse engineer back into your return on investment or ROI.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is a really great description of what's going on. I mean, what we don't want is being penny wise, the phrase penny wise, pound foolish, right? And that's what sort of had been happening, where people were trying to save and then really not realizing those risks. And then you've seen the year of the breach, as you mentioned. We have huge number of impacts financially, from a market perspective to those organizations. And at this point, you have to assume you've already been breached. That's really there's no secret. Now the question is, what is it going to cost you, and how long before you want to discover it? So if you want to just, basically close your eyes and say, okay, well, we'll go for as long as we can, it could be a catastrophic event. So I think that coming back to discovering things early, and that minimizes the cost, actually improves your ROI, right? Discovering things early, not letting them spread, real time versus after the fact,
absolutely.
Post analysis, and real time versus post analysis, seeing end to end, so visibility both from a detection perspective, but also having that insight to be able to see what happened on the network, what else happened, being able to fundamentally ask those questions: where did it spread? What else did it do? So being able to have that information quickly then all impacts that ROI, and it impacts really ultimately the amount of damage it will do if you didn't do those things. Right. So I think that there's a realization starting to happen, but then we talked about the complexity challenge, right? So if it's not simple, if it's not made easy, the solutions themselves actually feed into that frenzy.
Right. And I think to your point as well, in terms of quick visibility, Monahan did a study, I think it was last year, that they identified with their respondents, if you could respond to identify an issue within 60 seconds, you could reduce its cost by, I think it was 40% average, right? So it was a huge value to be able to get there earlier. I mean, that's a real dollar value that the people that experienced attacks were able to share with them. But that was a very useful piece of data as well from that perspective.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, at the upcoming Black Hat Conference, which is just in a few weeks, security researchers are going to be discussing a whole bunch of new vulnerabilities and threats that we haven't heard about yet, so that's always fun and exciting. And certainly...
Or trepidatious.
Yeah, it always makes you feel kind of excited and then really horrible right afterwards.
I have that in my network. Oh no.
Exactly. Or I soon will. Yeah. If it wasn't there before, check your watch and it'll be there by tomorrow. And certainly some of those are about things that are going to really be able to avoid detection. The attackers always seem to be ahead of us, and there are things that they're rootkits. They're built for the specific purpose of being able to get around all of our tools, and then even when we can eject them, they manage to persist. So knowing all of that, what kind of trends are you seeing? Is there anything in particular that you're worried about? And have you looked at the Black Hat schedule at all? Is there something that you're looking forward to learning more about?
So on specifically, I think one comment you made, they're the attackers or the bad guys are trying to find specifically new techniques. Well, one of the trends we've seen this past few years, actually, the old techniques, the old malware is what is really more dangerous because it's like the hackers are very efficient and they're recycled.
Oh yeah.
So it's really hard to engineer something new. How about I get something from 8 years ago that everyone forgot about, and let's bring that back. And guess what? Most organizations still not patched for that vulnerability that's existed from 8 years ago. So we've seen a lot of that recycling. And I sort of say it's clever as opposed to, hey, I have to spend all this effort and all this energy to invent something new. How about something old that people forgot about, but that old is really, you're still vulnerable to it, right? So we're seeing that trend, and we're going to see that continuation of that things that you forgot about as an organization, they didn't. In fact, they're very clever. Like, okay, well, let's look at that. It's low cost, high value for them, right? Now, coming back to Black Hat specifically and what the trends that we've seen, I think open source is a big issue. We've seen SSL vulnerabilities, we've seen Heartbleed, we've seen a number of others emerge out of that. And I have an interesting viewpoint. I'll get to that in a second. So open source is one topic that I think is going to be covered, but also it is what I think is a big gaping attack surface. Secondly is IoT, so Internet of Things, and we've seen the emergence of that. I think those two topics will really transcend the overall conference, and they will be injected into the different discussions because those create problems, and certainly security is one of those big problems. Management is another one. So coming back to open source. It's not just that open source code has some vulnerabilities that are not patched. I mean, there's other risks. I mean, 10 years ago, someone was part of a community in an open source project. They're very familiar with that open source project and code. It's used very widely, and now maybe they've gone to the bad side. So then what do you do? They know all the backdoors. That never happens. so you're on a good side, you're a bad side. You're a white hat.
A dark side.
Yeah. But those are real risks, right? I mean, it's not just the fact that there was poorly written code or it wasn't maintained, or what we saw with SSL, but those are real risks. I mean, and it's hard to tell, where someone stands, and that is with a lucrative market in the black market for this type of stuff, as far as hacking, as far as the information and data in the darknet. I mean, it's tempting for people who are in that domain to say, okay, well, this is, and then it's the tried and tested of money. That's what it really is, right? So that's a risk there. And on IoT, it's a different type of risk. I mean, I don't know if we're at the stage where, and it could be that we are, but someone's going to take over your refrigerator and start to do funky stuff, or traffic lights. But I think some of those are out there. But I think on IoT, I think it's the same issue. There's things being put out there without realizing the full impact of those, and we'll see what happens as we kind of see when you get there, right?
Yeah.
And so those are the two concerns that I have.
But that they'll get there first before we do. Yeah.
And speaking to your information about IoT, they expect something like 16 to 20 billion devices over the next few years to be put out there on the net. But it's happening right now. There are situations, in talking to other CISOs, for example, somebody bought a coffee maker, put it in the break room. It turns out it's internet enabled, and it was sending data back to China. Who knows what it was? I mean, it could have been, hey, you need some coffee and wanted to deliver. But it was interesting to find out they saw suspicious traffic on the network, and then they routed it back to this coffee maker.
Absolutely. And so if you look, even with IoT or open source vulnerability, but specifically with IoT, if you bring it back, it then comes back to network visibility. You really need to have visibility of what's happening. Are you talking, is there some device, it doesn't matter if it's a host or a user identity who's using an application, or a device that's in a physical device on the network that's doing something, specifically a camera or something else, but are they behaving, or is the traffic from that, is the network visibility and traffic from that, is that behaving in a way where it's suspicious? And it's not necessarily that you can detect the exploit or the attack or it's been compromised, but through that behavior analysis and through that traffic and visibility, you're able to see these, anomalies.
Right.
And that's really key, even in that domain.
Right. Right, and with something like IoT, you've got a combination, really, of some of the same things you had with mobility, and with bring your own device, and with open source, and
bringing it all together.
Yeah, bringing them all together, where you don't necessarily own them, or they're not, at the very least, they're not owned or managed by the IT department or the IT security department. And then the security tools don't necessarily run on those platforms, and so you've got this whole big mess.
Well, I think what we're seeing really is that,
so
what we're seeing is that there's a convergence. That's what I talked about, a paradigm shift, right? And the convergence really is the network traffic and network data, and having that visibility into what's happening, both anomalies and just traffic, in a way where it makes sense to the security team or security analyst, which means not bits and bytes and packets, but really at the service layer.
Right.
Looking at services, looking at applications, real time. That gives you that visibility. And that really then brings to light, okay, well, network is security. So having that network visibility has become part of security, or the future of security, right? Because having that visibility into what has happened both for the identities and what has happened with IoT devices, most of it is, do I realize what's on my network?
Right.
Do I really realize what's there? And the first step is to say, I acknowledge that I have things in my network that I wasn't aware of before.
Right. And then identifying, as you mentioned before, what's it doing?
What's it doing?
The visibility perspective, right? It's an unknown. It hits the radar, hopefully, and then you can figure out what's going on from there.
Definitely. I want to remind everybody out in the audience at this point that in about 10-15 minutes we're going to be taking your questions, but don't be shy. You can start entering in those questions right now, and we will get to them shortly. Okay, moving on. Everyone wants metrics. We want them ourselves, and then, of course, everybody in the boardroom is always asking for them to show how effective they are at everything, but certainly at detecting threats and compromises. Nobody seems to be satisfied with the metrics that they currently have. So why is that? What are the challenges of creating effective metrics? David, do you want to start with that?
Sure. I think one of the biggest issues is it varies considerably by environment. And also by verticals. So the financial verticals, people will look for different things in terms of fraud and risk, and versus medical organizations that look for different types of fraud and different types of risks. A good example of that, for example, would be in the medical field. You have to look at the medical devices and are they connected, and how people access them and so forth. You don't have that issue in the financial sector, right? And the same thing with utilities. You're looking at SCADA devices and how they're being exploited or attacked and scanned, etc. You don't have that issue in something like I totally blanked out, but another healthcare environment or something like that. There it was, went gone. But in all seriousness, so that makes it difficult because you've got different requirements for different verticals, and then within an organization you're going to have different requirements as well. So when you look at that, some people have been doing things as simple as how many antivirus clients are still operational or do I need to deal with. That could be a valid metric in your environment. It may not be. We also probably want to look at information about applications and how they're behaving, and look at an operational intelligence from a performance perspective that could be indicative of a security issue. We may want to look at transactions and fraud. If we have a high volume web transaction environment or some other environment like that it deals with some kind of payments, that's something we want to monitor. If we have outsourced that or don't deal with that, then not a big deal. So that's what makes it difficult. I can be a CISO at one organization, be very successful in my metrics, move to another one, and be very unsuccessful because I haven't taken the time to really understand what's going on in that environment. So I think that's the first issue, is making sure you understand the details of your environment from a management perspective, and then what's important to your business as operations and stakeholders. If you can measure security around those assets, that's very important. And what we're seeing, for example, as a trend is that we're seeing less organizations are able to baseline their environments from a security perspective. That's dropped by over 50% in the last 2 years, 3 years since we've been doing the data-driven security report. And then below that, companies are saying because we don't baseline, we have a very difficult time in determining what our high-value assets are and then being able to monitor them. So with those two drops that correlate, I mean, how are you going to create the proper metrics if you don't understand what your key value assets are?
Right. You don't know what you have. You don't know what's important. Right. How can you possibly decide?
What how do I measure it?
Right.
I can't.
Usman, you have anything to add to that?
I think that was very well put. And the only thing I would add to that is that there's one element, and again, I was talking about this paradigm shift, right? One element that's really key. The metrics are important, but there's also a new way of thinking that's needed. The new way of thinking is somewhat subjective, so it's going to be difficult. It's when I mention usability. usability is really important, and usability really comes to not just giving me intelligence, but can I reduce my time to discovery, right? And some of those metrics are harder because where we are taking months, right? Taking months to discover that we've actually been breached, and so, but those types of metrics are somewhat subjective, so I can tell you it's going to be harder to measure, but I think the paradigm shift has to go into a little more agile type of environment where you have the traditional metrics that you can measure. And those are very, very, very important, so you can't ignore those. But also there has to be some flexibility in the organization to understand both the usability and ease of use, and how we can make that whole environment simpler. And again, they're subjective in nature. It's going to be hard to put metrics around that, but that's what we have to change that thinking of actually show me, and I want to be able to see it, and I want to be able to visualize it, and I want to be able to quickly make some decisions about, is it good or bad? Does it affect my organization now, right? And those things you want to be able to get to quickly. It's hard to measure on those aspects, the subjective sides, but it's also very important to look at those aspects fundamentally in the solutions from a metrics perspective.
Yeah, I think that comes down to an idea of mean time to detect and average dwell time and these types of things, which are they can be measured, but they can be very variable.
Variable.
I don't want to use the same word twice, but that does create an issue. But if you can do that, and so you can identify, yes, we're able to identify these issues because of our visibility within X number of days, minutes, seconds, whatever. If we can get all the way down to seconds, absolutely be great. But
yeah, and then I think that there was a mentality, and the shift really is that going away from the checkbox approach. Right? And I think you still need the controls in place to have those check boxes, but not solely relying on that to feel comfortable. Going beyond that and being proactive and being proactive
almost
also
predictive. Yeah.
So that's where we really need to be.
Yeah.
Just to expand on the idea of visibility, because we've used that word a lot. What is it that we want to see? Is it activity? Is it the network? Is it the devices? Is it the users? Is it what those users are doing? Is it the data moving? Is it what's being exfiltrated? Is it what's being brought in? Is it all of that? And is it all of that together? Because it seems like we want to know all of it, but
and
then
piecing
it all together. And we want to know it now. And we want to know
Absolutely.
what is, but I think also something that I think you were saying earlier, David, is that we don't necessarily have a baseline. So you can give me all of that, but I don't necessarily know which of it is odd.
Yeah, if I don't know what's changed, what good does it do?
And have I seen it before?
Right, have I seen this before?
I'm seeing this now, and I see potentially a campaign or a breach, but have I seen this before? And if I've seen it before, what did I do before?
Yeah.
It's really, I mean, where did I see it?
Yeah.
And you can look at it from a global perspective. So has anybody out there, from a threat intelligence perspective, seen this? So getting that question very quickly, but also have I seen it in my organization, let's say in the last 6 months? That's a simple question that can be asked. And I think it takes too long to get to that answer. It could take days, it could take weeks, because it's data's in some silo somewhere, and you have to go dig it out. It's so hard that you kind of stop asking that question and you kind of say, okay, well, let me move on. So I think that's a fundamental, when you talk about visibility, I mentioned not just surfacing more data, but being able to answer those fundamental questions very quickly,
right.
And through a immersive sort of experience, as opposed to something that looks hard and makes you work hard. How about something that makes you, work more effectively?
Right.
Yeah. I think one of the catch terms that we hear quite a bit today is big data, and I don't think in security it's about bigger data. It's about better data. If you can take the big data, if you will, and distill it up into key items that get you there faster, that's ultimately what we have to do. We can't stick with I want to see everything at the base layer. Now, granted, we have to keep that for forensics and potential legal issues and so forth in many cases. But from an actual analyst perspective, we need to get them more condensed, more distilled information faster so that they can respond quicker.
Definitely. Okay. One of the issues that is often raised about detection tools is the frequency of false positives. So not only do we have the problem of not finding the bad stuff, but when you're getting told about bad stuff that doesn't actually exist. What can organizations do to reduce that problem? And how can we better focus our people on the real threats and compromises?
I think from my perspective, it's the underlying technology analysis. Right? Okay. The technology has to be able to take data, stitch it together, create the context, and then present that distilled information, as I mentioned before, back up to the individual. Our research said that 50% of the organization suffered from too many false positives. That was their biggest concern, right? And then the second one was uncorrelated data. They were getting too many alerts to deal with. They were accurate, but there were just so many scrolling up the screen they couldn't deal with. And so the underlying solution to that, which sounds trivial, but it's not, right, is to get the data condensed so that you can eliminate the false positives, right? I have 3 checkpoints out of 5 that say this is correct, so we're going to believe it is correct, versus 1, which probably indicates it's a false positive. And then from there, you can correlate the data and move it up. The problem we run into a lot of times is the technologies that do that are often signature-based or rule-based or human policy-based, and if it has to be known by the person before you can detect it or correlate it, then you have an intrinsic problem with your solution in many ways, because anything that comes in you haven't expected is undetected at that point.
I mean, this great answer, and I'd add to that. I have a slightly different viewpoint. I think false positive is very important. There's a lot of talk and conversation in the industry about false positives. People making a lot of claims about, we're less than 0.1% false positives. It's all subjective, really, because you're talking about, discovered attacks, so you can keep looking at all the statistics. But I think there's a different way of looking at it. I look at it as, how do we prioritize? How do we allow the organization, how do we allow the security analyst, security team to prioritize those issues? Because they're all situations. Right? Now, there may be an element of false positive, but the prioritization of those issues, what is really high impact versus low impact, that decision-making process and making that process easy, to me, is fundamentally more important than saying I have 0.1% better false positive rate. Because no matter what that rate is, it's still going to be too much in that context of, 1% of a billion is still a lot.
Right,
and,
right.
So
no, that's true.
The attackers can use an exploit kit and create it. We hear something like 1 million new malware, a very large number of malware every day, as far as engineered or repurposed and thrown out there. So the exploit kits and the automations the attackers or hackers have, that can generate more noise and more. So we really have to look at, intelligent prioritization, automated, as you mentioned, and how do we distill from low value to high value assets real time and be able to give that data. So then the false positive issue is really around behavior. The behavior looks suspicious, so it is an issue. But now is it an attack that's happening, potentially even a campaign, on an asset that's really not important to me? Diversion is one of the key things that these attackers use. They'll give you a lot of different things to look at, and then they'll low and slow and just go in and right under the radar. So we have to kind of mature from that and learn that prioritization and distilling which assets in my organization, they'll be unique to every organization in the vertical.
Yep.
And that is really a bigger question to be answered. And solutions that can do that, they will really, it's really changing the game from a false positive, pure metrics to this type of thinking.
I think, though, also to your point, when you have the capability to prioritize, not only identify the key assets, which we talked a little about earlier, and that people aren't doing that, right? When you can do that, you're eliminating the things that are false positives just flat out,
which
right?
is a different approach.
Right, and then you're also taking the items that might be considered false positives, but they're really maybe lower risk. Lower issue. So yes, this port is down, let's say, but that's really not my key issue. This is really my key issue, and when you can bubble those to the top, it solves itself, if you will.
Yeah.
So I agree.
I kind of say, hey, look, if someone's got a CISO's laptop under attack versus someone who's in a without that level of privilege, that's a big issue, right?
Right.
I mean, but can we know that at the time when it happens?
Right.
And when we don't, maybe it's both are very legitimate attacks, but the value of protecting one asset versus the other is much different.
Absolutely.
Bigger risk.
Absolutely.
Okay, looking forward, what would you say is the future of threat technologies? Looking forward,
I need my Karnak hat.
I would say most of the time it would look something like 5 years in advance, but in security we can't possibly look that far. So let's say in a year or 2 years, what do you see coming soon?
I can start off.
Go ahead.
So I think we're at this turning point. What I see now is machine learning becoming adopted as far as machine learning of the malware behavior. So really focusing more on the attackers and what the malware that's being produced, or exploits or attacks being, and so getting away from the rule-based approach. I think that's starting to be adapted. But that becoming sort of the norm. I mentioned prioritization. that's an important aspect, and automatically prioritizing and sort of machine learning based prioritization, right? And then simplifying the user experience. I think that's going to be the key for let's say 1 year out. How do we simplify the user experience? A little bit further out, I think it is the future is here. I mean, we really have to have systems, and what is really focusing on is where systems that learn from the security teams themselves. So the behavior of a security team and what they prioritize, maybe today through some mechanism, but a system that also solutions that start to learn from the security operations teams themselves. So kind of that feedback loop, but in an organic way. Yep. So machine learning around malware short term, but longer term, machine learning around the enterprise, and it's really around the sort of the AI intelligence and that, but more targeted towards your organization and understanding what is your risk tolerance and what are the behaviors that your security teams have and what do they ignore more often, and kind of taking those cues automatically.
Right, right. And I think what you said about machine learning is absolutely key. The issue that we have is there's a lot of buzz around machine learning, and there's a lot of intellectual property that's been put out around these types of algorithms and how they adapt. So as consumers look at technology, they really want to evaluate what the vendor is defining as their machine learning. The adaptive algorithms that learn from input and are able to kind of maneuver themselves down to a key information set. The way it's done is very different amongst different vendors. So that's going to be a key differentiator, I think, amongst those. The usability is absolutely also very, very key, because you can have a great system that knows everything on the backside, but presents it in a terrible way, and ultimately is an inhibitor to be able to succeed. So,
all right, definitely.
So it's the most advanced solution, and it's really hard for you to operate, and you pretty much give up.
And that's been done before, right? I mean, we've seen that in the industry. So
definitely.
We need the easy button as well.
That's right.
Well, this has all been fantastic, but I'm not the only one who has questions. So it's finally time to take some of your questions from the audience. So let's see. We've got a lot of good ones here.
Here it comes.
Okay, let's start with this one. What about the really small businesses? Because certainly they need some love too, and they can't afford a lot of this, and a lot of them don't even have full security teams, if they even have one person assigned just to IT security. What do? How do they survive in this new environment? Because certainly they are being targeted as well.
Absolutely. Small businesses are targeted because they have intellectual property as well, and as you mentioned, they don't have the budgets. A lot of times it's going to come back to them relying on some sort of cloud services vendor that has the capabilities they need, because they can't afford their own data center, they can't afford their own people. But if they can find, engage, I should say, a vendor in the various areas, whatever security area they're looking for, to help them do that, that's going to be their first play, and that way their individual resources that are focused on development or whatever that they have to get their product out don't have to worry about it. And that's one great aspect of the way cloud has evolved over the last few years, is it gives them the opportunity to be able to engage that way. They don't have to have their own data center, etc. So that's one thing that I would say from a small business perspective. Ultimately, cloud can be more expensive in the long run because you're paying for all the services cloud provide, but in the short run, you don't have the capital expenditures, and so from the first, let's say 3 to 5 years, it ends up being cheaper, and then you have to make a go, no-go decision. And depending on the type of technology, though, cloud could be cheaper indefinitely, because if you think about a 3 or 5 year refreshing time frame where you have to buy new hardware to start the cycle over again, you don't have to do that with cloud. So there are pros and cons.
Cost of entry is a lot lower.
Absolutely.
The only thing I'll add to that is that the cloud is really important from an enabling technology, but we also have to look at the expertise. So managed security service providers, which are cloud with cloud-based services, but also with the human expertise that will bring along this. So MSSPs are going to play a key role in enabling the services to be gained, both they're hosted cloud-based, but also they're going to provide the expertise. And I think they are going to enable security to be kind of at that smaller organization to become more mainstream, and that's really key.
Yeah, you beat me to it there. From our perspective, the research we did for data-driven security showed that there was a 123% increase in the adoption of managed security services between 2014 and 2015's reports.
And it's only going to increase. It's only going to increase
exactly right.
as this becomes in a forefront as far as advanced persistent threats and more cyber attacks of this nature. managed security service providers have a big window as far as an opportunity to help many organizations out there.
Absolutely.
Definitely. Another question here. I attended RSA and heard a number of presenters talk about campaigns and detecting active campaigns. How important is this, and are we capable of doing this today? And I would add to this, this reminds me of being able to detect threats at different parts of an attack. There's some people trying to detect it right at that when they're just kind of probing and looking for something, and then later stages. So, so what are your thoughts on all that?
Go ahead.
So you know, it's a definition of a campaign. So some people think a campaign is, you know, it's a 12-hour period. So my view and our fundamental view at ThreatTrack is that campaign could be, you know, 6 months. It could be 6 years. It's a different problem, but I think, you know, 6 months to a year. I mean, what we've seen is, I would say 6 months is the right time, in the sense that something has been planned, it's been put into the organization. If it's really a persistent attack where it's really targeted, then there's a lot of planning that goes into it.
Absolutely.
There may be some even a compromised host that gets owned, and we've seen on the average, I think what we've heard from the industry is 3 months, but it could be 6 months in nature. So I think the fundamental thing around what do you mean by a campaign, and I come back to the visibility. You need to know real time the attack as it's taking place, but that fundamental question, did I see this before? The campaign is that I saw this 6 months ago, and now I'm seeing some elements of later stages of it, and being able to see that and have that at that moment, or within, you know, a reasonable amount of time. We're talking about, you know, not days or weeks or months to get that data out, but be able to do it, you know, in that context when you're looking at it. And so it all depends on the timeline of the campaign. But I think we absolutely have the technology to be able to put those dots together, and simplifying that user experience really, you know, kind of makes that. But it will vary. Some will be 12 hours, some will be 6 months, and you have to do both, and you have to do them both in a simple way and well. So.
Right, and that's the tricky part, really, because you're trying to identify individual events and then put those together as a big puzzle to identify that larger campaign. And that's where a lot of technologies really struggle, especially traditional technologies, I'll say, because they aren't as good at that low and slow or the very, very long term, 6 months, 12 months. And the attackers, if you have information, they're going to apply as much resource as they need to get it based on the value they perceive, right? I mean, it's a business decision for them at this point. Hacking is no longer just guys wanting to get their name on the Doritos box or the, you know, whatever it is, right? It's about money. And so they're trying to figure out, I think this IP, whatever it is, or these social security numbers or credit card numbers are worth this amount of dollars based on the dark net, and so I'm going to apply some ratio of that cost, or as a cost, to be able to claim it. So they can take months, and the hard part with security is we have to be successful 100% of the time. The bad guys only have to be successful one time. So exactly. You do have to be able to identify the individual events and then create that longer term visibility to be able to identify all of this is a campaign, it's all related, and then be able to deal with it not only on an individual basis but on a holistic basis.
It is not easy. Okay, one more question here. You described the need to empower frontline security professionals and the importance of visibility. So, what are you doing at your organizations to help all the people in the audience accomplish those two things?
I'll let you go first.
Chance.
No, I can take this from a general perspective. So, I mean, one of the things that I do is I look at these solutions and try and figure out pros and cons of various solutions, the value of those solutions to individuals. So I mean, that's what analysts do. Right, we're not just here to be pretty faces, as you can well see. We're here to help.
We think you're very attractive.
So we need to be able to help the organizations by writing these reports and so forth. And there's plenty of organizations that help you do that. But we should be able to drill down and say these are the value propositions they provide. Here are the things that they do well. Here are the things that they don't do well. So from a generalist perspective, we can do that. And then it's up to the individual technology owners to hear those reviews and the feedback from their customers and be able to act upon those to create a better solution, if you will.
So if I can describe it in just simple terms, we've created a solution at ThreatTrack that's effective, efficient, and relevant. And if I could describe it in sort of a soundbite, visibility that matters. And that's how I sum up what we've created. And I think, it speaks for itself. I mean, it really is trying to simplify that user experience and an immersive experience for the security analyst. And I think we really, have focused in on that. When we built our solution, it was with this intent in mind. It was purpose built to create this type of environment and create this type of experience. And again, those 3 bullets that I hit. I think that's the best way I could describe it in simple terms, without going on.
Excellent. Okay, we are at the end of our time here, gentlemen, so I'm going to give you 10 seconds apiece. Any last thoughts you want to make sure that the lovely people at home come away with before I let you go?
I think from my perspective, it's important to be able to evaluate solutions for your environment. And too many people try to move from environment to environment, pull something that was very successful in the last environment, put it in there, and hope it's going to be successful or expect to be successful when the environments are actually different. So make sure you evaluate your requirements well with the other organizations to avoid political alienation and things like that, and get a solution that will help more people with less money.
Excellent.
I've already given a lot of the details, but I could say, come see us at Black Hat. I always, I look at so many solutions out there, and seeing is believing, and that's where it really is now. You have to see it, and when you see it, and you'll actually understand what we're saying from that, paradigm shift and user experience. We're excited. We think we are at that tipping point, and that, having a breakthrough as far as changing that paradigm of how security is viewed. It can be made easy, but it can bring less data is more if you can bring the right data to surface at the right time.
Great. Well, thank you both, gentlemen. It has been a pleasure. I'm afraid that is it. We have come to the end of our session. I hope you found it worthwhile. And if you would like to continue the conversation, or if there's something we didn't cover today that you think needs covering, please go ahead and send us your thoughts via the questions area or the feedback form. For more information related to today's webinar, please visit any of the resource links open before you now. And within the next 24 to 48 hours, you will receive a personalized follow-up email with details and a link to today's presentation on demand. Thank you for attending today's keynote, Winning the War Against Cyber Attackers, brought to you by Dark Reading, ThreatTrack, and United Business Media Limited. This keynote is copyright 2015 by United Business Media Limited. The presentation materials are owned by or copyrighted, if that is the case, by Dark Reading and ThreatTrack, who are solely responsible for its content, and the individual speakers who are solely responsible for their content and opinions. On behalf of our guests, David Monahan and Usman Choudhary, I'm Sara Peters. Thank you for your time, and have a great day.